up there, but the 94 learning curve is quite a few. Now, as Michael has mentioned, Madeira wine has been one of our businesses within the group. It's a very fine wine, produces an extremely good wine with a lot of finesse. The Turkish, in terms of residual sugar, is between the Fratello and the grape varieties, Fratello and the wild varieties. And it was during this period where the company itself was undergoing certain change. As some of you might know, 1974 was the Carnation Revolution, the Portuguese Revolution. It was a bloodless coup, but of course there was a threat of extreme socialism or even communism. So at the time, the company's property, the family's property, was under a lot of pressure, and my father at the time had to deal with this. And on a couple of occasions, he thought his life might be at risk when he was barricaded in one of the electricity companies, and had to call on the local military to actually help him and his staff get out from a certain beating. So it was tough times in Madeira, but fortunately things managed to resolve themselves. And this wine produced 2 years after the revolution. So it's quite an important period in Madeira's history.
Bull de Mel in Madeira, that type of thing.
66, of course, you know, for the British public, it's a very good year for us.
We won the World Cup.
Yeah. But also at that time in Madeira, more change happening on the island. The company was very much focused on the shipping companies, on the shipping agency. We had a shipping agency in Madeira, one in the Canaries, and later actually at this time as well, in Lisbon. But of course, with the construction of the airport in Madeira, in 1964, things changed, and of course we had to adapt. And that's when we opened the travel agency, and we were one of the first travel agencies in Madeira at the time. And both of them, both the shipping agency and the travel agency, still exist today, and are still going strong. My grandfather and Michael's father both did their stints as honorary British consuls. And Michael's father, John, he actually was awarded. He was made an OBE in 1963 for his work done.
Francisco and I were just having a word about the wine then, and we agreed that the lovely thing, Churchill can be quite austere, and it's probably the least understood of all styles of Madeira, being the driest. And it can be sometimes quite austere. Sometimes that searing acidity which you get with all Madeira can sometimes be almost overwhelming. But I think the lovely thing about this wine is actually again its gentleness. It's not nearly as austere as some. And Madeira actually works with those. It's one of chocolate and coffee kill most wines, stone dead, but Madeira works with those. So I'm putting Madeira after Madeira into this book. I don't know if it helped sales at the time, but it certainly worked with the recipes.
But John had returned after starting his professional life in the UK and working for the London Blandy's branch. And he was working with his brother, or my grandfather, and his main responsibilities became the Reese Hotel, running the Reese Hotel, and of course the Madeira Wine Company. So.
Mostarda is a variety, it's a red grape. It's the only, when the grapes were classified as noble and good in those days, it was the only noble red grape, I think that's right. And it's pretty well extinct now. In fact, I've got a note here that this is the last wine in the company's collection made from this grape. So it's something rather unique. You don't see much Mostarda around. It's great. We're going to the Blandy 54 Malmsey, bottled 1975 in this case, which was a very fine vintage. Noel Cossart, who for many years had the Bible of books on Madeira wine, compares the 54 to the greatest Malmsey vintages of the 19th century, 1808 and 1880. And I must say, I absolutely love this wine. I tasted it in Funchal a couple of months ago. But I'll let you make up your own minds about it.
7 years after the end of World War II, Blandy's had gone through, again, an extremely, Blandy's Madeira, or Madeira Wine Company sales have been severely affected by World War II. At that stage, we were investing quite heavily on the island, and as Michael mentioned, due to bad debt, we assumed control of the Rees Hotel in 1937, which of course had to close in 1940. In 1950, Winston Churchill came out to Madeira and stayed at the hotel. It had only been opened 3 weeks before his arrival, so a lot of running around to try and get that all prepared. And I remember reading my grandfather's notes on preparing the hotel in preparation for his arrival. And of course he spent most of his time relaxing and painting a camera of Lordbush, which he became quite well known for. It was also quite an important year for Michael. He was born this year, and his father started work on the construction of his quinta, Madeira, up at Centre Serra, which still belongs to Michael. He goes up there for his weekends.
That's almost a hint of chocolate orange in the finish as well. It's the richness that's there as well. Francisco, I don't know if you want to comment on the wine and the technicalities.
Well, I want to say that wine is very, very concentrated for Verdado, and they have more sugar than Verdado, more permis. That wine is medium sweet in terms of residual sugars, 93 grams per liter.
293.
And it is very, very 93.
93.
And it's very, very smoky, bouquet, and I think they have lots of tobacco bulbs, cigars.
First of all, this wine for me, it's my personal favourite, the 1920 wine. Not only for the fact that the wine is absolutely fantastic, but more I find the history of the group at the time as well extremely interesting. As you can imagine, after World War I, finished in 1918, trading conditions must have been extremely tough. But also getting in imports into the island was also very difficult. And there was a classic shortage of sulphur, and we have noted that in 1917, actually there was almost no harvested. There was no harvest because almost all the grapes were mildewed for lack of sulphur on the island. So quite an interesting.
Which year was that?
1917. And of course, you know, we talk about the firm surviving 200 years, but it hasn't been all plain sailing. And it was over this time as well that it was quite amusing of the business opportunities that came up and failed drastically. One was the production of 20,000 boots for the French army, produced in the US and of course arrived to France and weren't accepted by the French. So that was a disaster. We were involved in a rubber production plant in Malaysia, which lasted a few years, but again, I think a bit of a flop. And also invested in a national cab service, or national taxi service, which flopped as well. So during this period, I think, you know, I think...
learn by your mistakes.
Yeah, it was John Ernest who was heading the company at this time. I'm surprised he actually lasted as long as he did. This was a period in which John Blandy, the third Blandy to chair the firm, was in charge. And he inherited an extremely broken up company from, well, he didn't inherit, sorry, he had to buy back off his sisters, the company that was left to assisted by Charles Rippart, his father. But he was a very savvy man, and he actually started to really develop the business on the island, and at the time the wine business was prospering. We have notes that 6,900 pipes were being exported out of Madeira per year. Now, of course, at this time it was when Blandy's really established itself as one of the main brands in the Madeira wine trade. Also, perhaps in the US, as Cossack Gordon at the time was the shipper to be most well known here in the UK. account on what was happening in the family at that time. John Blandy, the first John Blandy, died in 1955, and his son Charles Ridpath took over 1855, sorry, took over control of the firm. By the 1850s, the age of coal had arrived, offering new opportunities for the group. And of course, as we were shipping agents for the sailing ships passing by, it was a natural progression into providing coal. And so what Charles did, he bought land in strategic areas around the Bay of Churchill in order to be able to offer bunker services to these vessels that called at Churchill and supplying coal to the coastal steamers. As Richard said, this was post-Ovidium, pre-Phloxera, and it was during this period, during the American Civil War, that Blandys were actually representing both the Federate and the Confederate sides of the war, and so ships passing by.
There's a Howard Hughes, that's what he used to do about both sides, there's no doubt.
Yeah, so ships passing by Madeira, and it was, they had to be extremely diplomatic on their dealings with both sides.
Part of the concentration, and this sweet wine is not a medium sweet because they have more than 100 grams per liter in residual sugars. Is the fact of the oxidation of the alcohol. In that wine, and the bouquet alcoholic of that wine is a little different, and you notice a big evolution of the alcoholic bouquet. It's like you have very, very old brandy inside. Mix it with the Madeira wine. If you compare it with the 1910, if you are focusing in the alcoholic, the style of alcoholic bouquet, you see it was different. It's much more. You have found much more evolution in the 1863. The ethanol really is very, very evolutive.
Talking about each one of these wines, I think I'll just give you a quick overview on what was going on. John Blandy arrived in Madeira, not part of a military garrison as we had initially thought. It was actually Manny Burke, a Madeira wine enthusiast based in the US, who found a letter. And it was the reason why he went out to Madeira, as was the reason that many English families came out to Madeira, was for ill health. And this was discovered quite recently, actually, when my father and Michael were working on the creation of the book a few years ago. Manny Burke actually sent us a copy of the original letter. It was a letter of presentation informing that John Blandy would be out there in 1808, as I think he was 23 when he moved out there. He liked it so much that he decided to take his fiancée, or he got married in the UK. He got married in Holborn, St Andrews, Holborn, in 1811, and he brought his wife out to start life in Madeira. As a shipper, as a wine shipper in those times, he didn't just focus on wines. He was trading in a lot of different import and export goods, anything from cloths to vegetables to meat. I don't know what else he did, but it's all there in the book. I'm sure you can, if you have time to read it later. And it was during this time that his business started to expand, and he was trading across much of the Western world, from Russia to Holland, and from India to the Americas. But of course, anything with a family is always difficult to keep everybody happy, and he had two brothers working with him at the time, and sisters who remained in the UK. And there were very interesting letters produced and documented, again in the book, that showed disagreements between the various members of the family with the 1985 monthly. This is a very open forum, so please.
Well, to be a Solera in Madeira, the wine needs to aging at minimum 10 years, and they permit you to bottle 10% of that volume, and you need to add it 10% of the same variety with the same quality, okay, and that permits you to make that 10 times during the life of the wine. The last edition, you need to bottle all the volume of wine you have on the cask. That's why it's so complicated. It's why everybody abandoned to make so late.